You're listening to a Stanislaus Tutoring and Mentoring Program production. The following interview is one in a series of mentoring lectures conducted by the organization's Executive Director, Michael Camara. Future interviewees will include university professors, prominent local business owners and working professionals, and local public servants both currently holding office and candidates running for office. If you'd like to nominate someone you know to be interviewed, please send an email to info@stamptutors.com.
This is Michael Camara, and I welcome you to another edition of STAMP's Mentoring Lecture Series. The STAMP Lecture Series was developed as a useful information exchange outside of a more traditional classroom setting. I've crafted tonight's questions based on an amalgam of concerns expressed by CSU Stanislaus students, Modesto Junior College students, and a select number of high school seniors. My objective is to address a variety of issues that are directly relevant to the local educational community and are often considered provocative or controversial. I hope listeners find value in this casual radio discussion format and are able to use the provided information for their own personal benefit and to the benefit of their family and friends. Our guest today is Mr. Jose Hernandez, Democratic candidate for the United States House of Representatives, 10th District. The newly configured 10th District encompasses most of Stanislaus County, including Ripon, Salida, Modesto, Oakdale, Patterson, Turlock, and Newman. The district, primarily agricultural, contains roughly 650,000 people. We'd like our listeners to note that the Stanislaus Tutoring and Mentoring Program is a federally recognized nonprofit organization, therefore assumes complete neutrality during the season of political campaigning. We neither endorse or oppose individual candidates, policies, or propositions. In accordance with this license, we've also invited Republican incumbent Jeff Denham for an interview. His campaign representative has politely declined. So again, welcome, Mr. Hernandez, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure being here with you.
And we'll get right to the questions. Because some of our listeners may not be well acquainted with your political and personal history, beyond the fact of your having been an astronaut, could you provide some information about your personal story? What ultimately made you decide to pursue public office and become involved in politics?
Well, Michael, first let me start off by congratulating you on your efforts with STAMP, Stanislaus Tutoring and Mentoring Program. I think it's a great program. And that story begins way back when I was 9 years old, Michael. Fortunately, I'm old enough to remember the tail end of the Apollo program. I remember watching the very last Apollo mission, Apollo 17. It was 1972. I was all of 9 years old, and I was living here in the Valley. I was born and raised here in the Valley, went to school here and even college here at University of Pacific. But when I was 9 years old, there I was watching our black and white TV and with the rabbit ear antennas to improve reception. And as I held the antenna, I saw the very last man who ever walked on the moon walk on that moon that evening.
That was 1972.
And it was none other than astronaut Gene Cernan. Then I would go outside and see the full moon out there, come back inside and see and hear Gene Cernan walk on the surface of the moon while Walter Cronkite narrated it. And it was just something, it was just amazing. I was hooked then. And at that point, that's when I knew I wanted to be an astronaut. But here I am, a son of migrant farm workers, and I shared that dream with my father. My father, who only has a third grade education, he looked at me, he says, "Son, let's go to the kitchen." Thought I was in trouble first because I figured I'm shooting too high, coming from a family of migrant farm workers. But he sat me down and he must have saw the determination in my eyes. And my dad said, "So you want to be an astronaut?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "I think you can do it." He says, "You just have to follow a simple recipe, 5-ingredient recipe." He said, "First, identify your goal." I figured, well, I'm halfway there because I know I want to be an astronaut. Second, he said, recognize how far you are from that goal. And I figured, okay, he's going to get mad because I'm going to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I said, well, I'm pretty far away because I'm son of a migrant farm worker. He kind of laughed and said, well, I'm glad you recognize that, because the third step's even more important. Draw yourself a roadmap from where you understand where you're at to where you know you want to go, and don't take shortcuts. I said, well, what's the fourth step? He says, you're doing it right now, son. Get yourself a good education. Fifth and final, he said, the same work ethic you put out in the fields when you pick cucumbers and cherries on the weekends and during the summer. He pointed to my books and he said, you put it in your books. And when you graduate college and you get a job, he said, you give more than what's expected. Always give more than what they expect. Develop a good work ethic. He said, you mix that recipe together, son, you can be whatever you want. And I believe that, Mike.
Apparently, it seems to have worked.
Yes, the only thing I would add to that recipe is a sixth ingredient. That's my own ingredient. That's perseverance. Don't give up, because it took me 12 tries to get selected as an astronaut. And NASA actually turned me down 11 times. So you just improve yourself year after year and learn new traits and prepare yourself better to be more competitive, and eventually you'll reach your goal. And I did. In 2004, I became part of the 19th class of astronauts. In 2009, I flew as the flight engineer aboard Space Shuttle Discovery for a 14-day mission to the International Space Station. I came back to the Valley here in 2010 to tell my story, to share it with the kids here. But when I came here, Mike, I found this place completely different than when I left it in 2004. I found this place, it was at the peak of the mortgage foreclosure crisis. Stockton and Modesto were at the epicenter of the mortgage crisis. Unemployment more than twice the national average. And then what made things worse was I saw parents at the same stage my parents were when they gave me that 5-ingredient recipe. But I saw them a lot different than my parents. My parents were full of hope that their kids with hard work and an education can reach the American dream. These parents were a lot different. They were afraid of losing their jobs. Some of them had lost their jobs already. They were afraid of losing their homes due to the mortgage foreclosure crisis. Some of them had lost their houses already. And let alone, I told myself, wow, these kids have it tougher than I do, because at least my parents were there to support me, not economically, because they weren't able to support morally and provide that moral support, that structure, that base to make me a successful student. And these kids, their parents weren't even focused on that because they were too worried about bringing food to the table. So I went back home to Houston that week, and the following Sunday I found myself arguing with the TV at one of these political shows Sunday morning. And then I caught myself and I said, well, what are you doing, Jose? You're just playing an armchair politician. Why don't you walk the talk and get involved? And that's when I decided to say, I think I will get involved. And I think I can make a good congressman for the Valley, because I was born here, I was raised here, and I know what it takes to raise a family here. I'm the parent of 5 kids, so I have 5 tuitions staring me in front of my face. And the first one just started college. So I know the pain of a college education all again. I know the price of a gallon of milk. I buy 2 gallons of milk every day for my kids. So it's all these things that I'm in tune with what a middle America is about, what the needs are. This is why I decided to get involved, because I think I can go to Washington and create an environment that's more conducive to job growth here, that's more conducive to investing in education here, that's more conducive to protecting Medicare and Social Security here, more conducive to protecting veterans' benefits and allowing our veterans who risk their lives to be able to transition in a dignified way back to society as they come home from the war. It's those type of things that I think I would do a better job, Mike.
So it seems your personal experience with the Central Valley, witnessing the disproportionate stress and economic hardship brought about by the global financial crisis of 2008, motivated you to take action. So all of this contributed to your eventual decision to involve yourself in politics.
That's correct.
Without you, without you, without you, without you. I am lost, I am vain, I will never be the same without you, without you, without you.
What campaign positions demonstrably set you apart from your Republican opponent? On what points do you believe there to be the greatest policy divergence between you and Jeff Denham?
Well, I think I just have to point to one piece of legislation that sets us apart. Then we can peel the skin of that legislation so that you can see where the differences are. But that piece of legislation is the Ryan budget. My opponent has voted at every occasion for the Ryan budget, and he firmly stands behind it. And of course, the author of that is now the vice presidential candidate in Paul Ryan. But let's look at what the Ryan budget calls for. The Ryan budget calls for doing away with Medicare as we know it today. It creates a voucher program that has been shown does not keep up with the cost of health care. So what you're effectively doing, Mike, is you're shifting the cost of health care to the seniors over time, little by little. But I guarantee you 5-10 years from now, a big chunk of the premium is going to have to come out of pocket of the seniors. And it's going to get to the point where our poor seniors are going to have to make decisions of whether they pay their electricity bill or pay their health care premium. And we never want to get to that point. We want to protect the seniors. They've been paying into this all their lives. And we got to be able to take care of our seniors in a dignified way and guarantee that they do have access to quality health care. And so that's one area. Another area is, let's look at education. That Ryan budget calls for a 40% cut in the Pell Grants, the levels that are today. I'm the opposite. I call for an increase in Pell Grants. The Pell Grants have been at these levels for many years, and yet education goes up an average of 7 to 8% a year. Kids are already graduating with record level of debt. We're going the wrong way there. And that's why I said we have to increase it. We have to help the students even more. We have to invest in education. That's another area of difference. Third area is veteran benefits. My opponent is a veteran, and I'm surprised he supports this, but the Ryan budget calls for about a $10 billion cut in veteran benefits. And that's significant. And you never want to do that. Yet he's signed up for the Ryan budget, and he says he'll vote for it again if it comes up. And that's where the big differences are.
If we both agree that generally speaking the Central Valley is relatively conservative, both socially and fiscally, and also recognize the importance of securing the regional conservative vote to be considered a viable candidate, what strategies are you developing and what policies are you promoting in pursuance of this traditionally conservative vote?
Well, the way I look at it, Michael, is this isn't an issue of whether we should elect a Democrat or we should elect a Republican. It's an issue of we should elect the person who's most qualified, the person who would be able to go to Washington and solve problems in the best interest of District 10, in the best interest of California, in the best interest of this country, in that order. I'm a person who, like I said, I run a budget at home with my wife. I negotiate with my wife with 5 kids, and it's a give and take. You work in the center of the table, across the table, and you work to solve the problems. That's the same approach we need to be taking in Washington. We all need to be working together at the center of the table, working across the table in a give and take situation to move our country forward. Now, I'm not this big spender, frivolous spender. I want to make sure that we hold our spending in check, but I don't want to do it at the expense of not giving affordable health care to our seniors. I don't want to do it at the expense of having students incur $60,000, $80,000 in debt. I don't want to do it at the expense of bringing back our soldiers who risk their lives, and we have no transition program for them. We just leave them on their own, say, thank you for risking your lives. We'll see you. Good luck in the private sector. That's what I don't want to do. And it's not only negotiate with my wife. I worked at Lawrence Livermore Lab earlier in my career for 14 years. Part of that job I held was in the nuclear nonproliferation arena. I sat down in Geneva with State Department folks, with Department of Energy folks as the technical arm to negotiate basically agreements between the Russians and us with respect to the reduction of their nuclear weapon stockpile. And how we can technically implement these agreements was the reason I was there. I spent a lot of time negotiating at the international level with the Russians and with State Department folks.
Because STAMP addresses all manner of regional educational concerns, can you comment on what you plan to do for the local educational sector? Beyond a generalized policy outline, what would you specifically hope to accomplish regarding regional educational concerns if elected to the House of Representatives November 6th?
Well, first of all, let's take it by sections first, K through 12. One of the things that my pet peeves about K through 12 education is I believe the federal government and the state government have stuck their tentacles too deep into the local school districts in requiring testing and certain test results, benchmarks for each grade, that it has forced those teachers on day one when school starts to start teaching the kids how to take the tests as opposed to the material. I know this firsthand because I have 5 kids and I'm witnessing it. My youngest is in the 4th grade and we witnessed that. Poor teachers have their hands tied. They're forced to teach for taking tests because that's how their school is going to be graded on. And we have to stop that. I believe in testing, but I also believe in teaching. And so one of the things we have to do is we have to ease up on those requirements and figure some way of measuring teacher success as opposed to just testing. And that includes peer reviews, that includes administrative reviews, and maybe even student reviews of the teachers. Those are ways we can do that. High schools can be graded on not how many people they graduate from school, but rather how many of those students ended up going to continue their education. Whether it's a vocational or a 4-year university or a junior college. Let's look at how they're guiding those students, transitioning them on to the next level. That's a better grade indicator of success than just if they graduate with a good test score. Post-high school, obviously I harp on the same thing as I harp in the past, is that we have to make it a little easier financially for our kids to get a good college education. And that's where I think I differentiate myself from my opponent.
As a Democratic candidate running against a Republican incumbent, have you looked to other historically successful Democratic candidates in the area for campaign counsel, such as Jim Costa of the 20th District or Dennis Cardoza, formerly representative of the 18th District? Their districts, although situated in the southern portion of the Central Valley, have similar agriculturally oriented constituents. So hypothetically, what worked for them might also work for you.
The answer is no. I haven't looked for it because I don't believe there's a one-size-fits-all. The first part of my campaign was more of a listening tour. I wanted to listen to what the issues were, what the main concerns of our constituents were, because I think that's how you design a campaign around, to make sure that we're addressing those issues and those concerns, that we listen to our constituents, and then we design our campaign around that so that when we take office, we're already well positioned to start working on solving those problems. And that's the way I designed my campaign. So the answer is unfortunately no, I did not look at that. I believe our constituents deserve to be looked at, deserve to be listened to, and that's exactly what I've been doing.
Our last question is a situational question. If you're standing before a room filled with K through 12 teachers, numerous principals and vice principals from throughout the county, and various district administrators, what message would you present? What issues would you speak to? What, above all else, would you communicate to this important voting bloc?
Well, the one thing I would say is that they can't find a bigger friend for education than myself. I, for one, know the importance of teachers in the educational process of a student. Tell you a quick story of what one of my teachers did that changed my life completely. That was when I was in the second grade. I still remember her name, Mrs. Young. We typically were gone 3 months out of the year as a migrant farm working family back to my parents' hometown in Michoacan, Mexico. And that one particular year, I'm the youngest of four. My dad, as was tradition, will get up one day and announce to the kids, next week we're going to Mexico, get 3 months worth of homework from your teachers. And we would do that, and we would go to Mexico, and we would do our homework in my grandma's kitchen every morning from 8 to 12. And then when we would come back, we would turn it back into the teachers. Well, this particular year, Ian makes the same announcement. I go and tell it to my teacher, Mrs. Young, and Mrs. Young sort of looks at me and says, tell your parents I'm going to visit them tonight. So I go running and go back home, tell my parents, and of course, get two reactions from my parents. My dad first thought I did something bad, so he starts taking off his belt because he figures teacher's going to come and complain. After some fast talking, I finally convinced him that that wasn't the case. My mom, like a typical Latina, gets that Home Alone Macaulay Culkin look on her face because she has to clean the house and make dinner for the teacher and everything. So, because as Latinos, we have this great respect for educators. But nonetheless, the teacher came, Mrs. Young came, and basically what she told my parents, she had had my older siblings in her class before, in the 3 years before. So she had been through this routine. This is the fourth time she was going through this with our family of preparing 3 months worth of homework. I was the last one, but she came and she basically told my parents, and I appreciate that because I translated, so I appreciate the terms she used and I remember quite vividly what she said. She told my parents, imagine your kids as trees. And she asked the question, what happens if you continuously transplant them from place to place? Well, the roots aren't never going to grow deep. Tree's not going to grow big. It's going to stunt its growth. And she says, exactly. She says, so that's what's happening to your kids if you keep moving them around. She said, you need to stay in one place so your kids can get an education. And this was at Millard Fillmore Elementary School in Stockton. Well, after that year, we started staying in Stockton. We stopped moving around the valley because I lived here in Modesto. I lived in Salida, in Tracy. But we stopped moving around and we settled in Stockton. Our trips to Mexico got shortened to 3 weeks centered around Christmas instead of 3 months. Okay. And our education got traction. All because of what? Because a teacher took the time and initiative to talk to my parents. And that's what I tell the teachers. I said, I appreciate education. I appreciate educators. I know the impact they can make on a kid's life, on a whole family's life, for that matter. And just to summarize that story, when I blasted off into space in 2009, I looked for that teacher. Stockton Unified School District found her for me. She had just retired, and she was standing right next to my parents when I blasted off at Kennedy Space Center.
We appreciate your taking the time to speak with us today, Mr. Hernandez, and wish you good luck next Tuesday, November 6th.
Thank you, Michael, for taking the time to interview me, and keep up the great work with STAMP, and applaud you for your efforts.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.